But given that now police officer Rollins, who behaved questionably, and there's still question among many of us about his behavior, why is he representing the city in the negotiations? And why is not acting Chief Mahuna doing this? But more than that, why haven't we take action? It's been a long time we've been talking about this stuff. Not all the 6 years I've been here, but since the Fesser settlement became viral. I don't mean to insult you, but we have to look at this. Are we going to wait until somebody of color gets killed in West Linn or somebody else? Do we want to have blood on our hands? Because if we keep going in this halting and timid way, I predict that's what's going to happen. The recommendations of the task force, as well as the West Linn Community for Police Reform, can be done. Mr. Schuback, Attorney Schuback, you showed this with what you've negotiated with the Portland Police Department and the work you've done there. It can be done. Enough of our analysis paralysis, enough of the fear of what union members might or might not do, enough of, quite frankly, cowardice and playing it safe. Take action. Before we go down his history as condoning the systemic racism of the police department and the killing of people of color. Thank you very much.
The next one is Kathy Salvaggio.
Okay. Am I muted? Are you hearing me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. First, I want to make a quick comment before I move into my statement, and also just a quick question. Comment is that Evan Wickersham, who's also signed up for making a statement, said his computer crashed and he's trying to get back on. So I just wanted to let you know that he'll be following. The question I have is, where is Mayor Walters this evening? Is she not part of this? Hello?
Mayor Walters had other matters that she had to attend to this evening, and so she's not joining us this evening.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Okay, well, thank you. My name is Kathy Salvaggio. I live in the Willamette neighborhood. I am a founder of the West Linn Alliance for Inclusive Community, which got its start in 2016 in the wake of the racist Facebook posts made by former West Linn police officer Tom Newberry. I am also a founder and co-coordinator of the West Linn Community for Police Reform, which was created in February 2020 after the shocking news about Michael Fesser's wrongful arrest. And I want to thank you for holding this listening session to hear from other West Linn residents. Now, first, I want to begin by acknowledging that the huge failures of our West Linn Police Department in recent years have been failures of management and command staff, not so much failures of the rank and file officers who are covered by the union contract. It appears that everyone in the West Linn Police Department involved in the Fesser wrongful arrest and the aftermath of that arrest was middle or upper management. And even in the case of former Officer Newberry, who was protected by the union, the city ended up paying him hefty amount in back wages for about 18 months while he was on administrative leave because his abhorrent behavior was tolerated by the command staff until it was publicly exposed through the media. And when former police officers like Kirk Tonkin tried to blow the whistle on command staff, he met with retaliation and firing. Thus, the contract can only go so far in addressing the problems of the past. Nevertheless, I think there are many changes to the contract with the police union that will benefit our police department as a whole, and by extension, the community of West Linn. The city has invested in the work of a police oversight task force, which is composed of volunteers who have given considerable time and effort over the past 8 months to making detailed recommendations that would strengthen oversight and accountability of our police department. Many of the recommendations are directly relevant to the union contract. Mayor Walters led the effort to create this task force and has regularly praised its work. Chief Mahona, I have often heard you say how supportive you are of the various proposals that are discussed during the task force meetings. Therefore, I call upon the City Council, the City Manager, and the entire bargaining team for the city to fully own the task force recommendations and make them a roadmap to your bargaining position. I want to highlight just a few of the task force recommendations that I think are critical to the upcoming bargaining sessions. First and foremost, we want the city to establish a permanent oversight body that should have the authority to oversee a professionally trained person or persons. The professional staff would receive and review complaints from either the public or other police officers, refer the complaints for external investigation where needed, recommend discipline in the case of police misconduct, recommend changes to police policy, and recommend changes to practices such as training. The oversight board would approve or deny the staff recommendations and refer them to the police department as well as the city manager. Second, the oversight committee would also have a seat on interview panels for hiring and promotion of the Westland Police Department staff. And third, there should be maximum transparency regarding investigations, audit reports, disciplinary decisions, and any lawsuits filed against the Westland Police Department. In addition to the task force recommendations, I call upon the city to require the use of body cameras. This policy should be accompanied by rules that the cameras be activated as soon as an officer makes a stop, and that the footage from the camera be regularly archived, protected from tampering, and stored for at least as long as the time limit for statute of limitations for most violations. So as I said earlier, the union contract can only go some of the way toward putting into place a broader set of reforms that I hope the city will adopt. The city should also pay close attention to reforms that will ensure accountability, not only for the rank and file officers, but also for the leadership of the police department. As someone who's been following the police issues closely, I do look forward to watching the bargaining session starting next week. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. That's it.
Yes, and thank you for your comments, Ms. Savaggio, as well as to you, Ms. Farber. Ms. Molesky, are there any other members of the public that would like to speak?
Evan Wickersham.
Mr. Wickersham, please proceed.
Great, thank you. Steve, you haven't aged a day. Good to see you. For those who don't know, Steve and I used to bargain against each other, when I represented police and other unions, doing the same work that he does now. And we spent a lot of time together. I just wanted to take a moment to address the council and say, alluding to my background there, that I've been on the employee side of labor negotiations my entire career, representing corrections officers, police officers, but mostly other public employees. So that's part of why I volunteered for the task force, because I thought I brought a perspective to it that was a little bit different than one you'd be able to find if someone like I didn't raise my hand. So I hope that you'll take the time to try to incorporate as much of the work of the task force into your proposals as possible. There's a lot there. I wonder if you have enough time in order to make them into proposals before your for your cutoff date. I imagine you have a certain amount of meetings before you're not able to make any new proposals in your ground rules. Is that true, Steve?
The ground rules are posted online, but yeah, there are some restrictions there for opening proposals, which can be provided conceptually as well.
Fair enough. So I would just ask you, you're mindful of that time and think about that if that's something you think you're going to be able to achieve in light of the fact that those recommendations are still going to go to council before they, the bargaining team would act on them, obviously, because that's just the order of operations for how things work in city government. And then I think I would just, I think there's the opportunity for the perception to be that the task force work was somehow anti-police or anti-police officer, the rank and file members. And I just wanted to take a moment to say that I don't see it that way, having done that work. And this is not just to lay blame, but from my perspective, at least, most of the failures that I've read about in the Fesser case, which I think instigated a lot of the work in our community, are on the part of the command staff. And that now, in negotiations, everyone's triangulated on the bargaining unit members as the place where we're going to fix all these issues, right? That we're going to make all these proposals to a collective bargaining agreement, and that's going to prevent these type of things from happening in the future. So I just want to bring that perspective to the table and say, one of the most powerful things I think the city could do, both in negotiations and outside of them, is for the command staff to say, look, we voluntarily submit to this process of having a police oversight board. We think it's a good idea. We will immediately put the command staff, most of which I assume are at will, under the jurisdiction of that board while we bargain it with police officers in the bargaining unit to show that we're willing to lead by example. And that goes for the rest of the recommendations of the task force. I think I would ask that you do the same. So I think if I was in the rank and file, I'd be looking to see that people are willing to implement the same things for themselves. My leaders are that they're asking me to do. And then I think the last point we made in our task force meeting is that we're going to be proposing a lot, assuming that these things make it into the bargain, a lot of new oversight, a lot of things that might cause apprehension in terms of the recruitment and retention of officers to West Linn. And I think that last thing that we talked about during our task force is super, super important, which is that all these things we're asking for, there's got to be a cost for them. And I think we need to put a large raise for rank and file police officers on the table in order to account for the things we're asking of them that aren't going to be asked of them in other jurisdictions. So if we're going to lead by example by having some of one of the strongest contracts with respect to oversight and transparency and other policies like body cameras and the like, we need to put something on the table that makes sure that not is our if our proposals aren't just attractive at the bargaining table and we're not able to achieve it there, that we had to go to an interest arbitration. We have a compensation piece attached to our proposals that show that we understand what we're asking is a lot, and we intend to compensate for what we're asking for because it's different from places around us. So that's all I'd have to say. We'll be watching, and if there's more opportunities for us to participate, like in the listening sessions or viewing bargaining, I think many of us will do that. But we just wish you luck, and I know it's those are hard conversations, and I've been there. So good luck to you.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you for the comments.
That is all of the attendees.
Thank you, Ms. Molesky. I'd also like to recognize that the council has received many emails regarding the Police Oversight Task Force, and those members that have submitted those emails are all in support of the recommendations made by the Police Oversight Task Force. Council will be reviewing all those emails during an upcoming executive session. Thank you for submitting them to us.
If I may as well, the emails that are forwarded to me, which appears to be all of them, I do independently read and cross-check and compare to my proposals just for informational sake.
Councilor Baumgartner, please go ahead.
Thank you, Council President Relier. I just wanted to quickly mention my appreciation for all of the community who have gathered and given their time and engagement on this issue. And it gives me a lot of hope that we can improve the situation because we're working together. Thank you.
Mr. Schuback, do you have any responses that you would like to share with us regarding the public comments that were received this evening?
I would love to engage in long discourse on some of these topics. We are limited today, however, to procedural aspects. And I do appreciate the comments that were made by everybody. Just procedurally, a call to action is limited for the purposes of collective bargaining in that we have to bargain in good faith and we have a bargaining process. And there are many topics that require bargaining, as evidenced with the Portland example, that we are fully engaged in bargaining. So we have things that we have to bring to the table and bargain to some form of remedy. And Mr. Wickersham referred to interest arbitration. Just for reference, should the parties not reach a resolution in collective bargaining, we would then proceed to mediation. If the parties don't reach resolution in mediation, under Oregon law, this is not a unit that can strike. Under Oregon law, because we want our police officers to come to work and not strike, in lieu of strike rights, the unit has binding arbitration rights. Those binding arbitration rights are decided by a third-party arbitrator that's selected mutually between the parties. The reason it's called interest arbitration is because under the statute, the primary criteria is which offer is in the best interest and welfare of the public. And so that the public understands in this session, binding arbitration is one where the arbitrator is limited to deciding one package or the other package of either party's proposal. In other words, it's all or nothing when you reach that point. We are very hopeful that we won't reach interest arbitration, but that would be the process. And it does take some time. Bargaining is a mandatory 150-day process. Mediation generally adds several months to that, and arbitration adds 5 to 6 months after that. That being said, with COVID, it is also difficult to meet as we normally would, so things are a little bit delayed as well.
Thank you, Mr. Schuback. Would any other members of council like to make a comment at this point? Councilor Bielostowski, please.
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and providing the testimony. And I was just going to ask Stephen if he could give a general statement about the next step, kind of where we go from tonight, and if to the extent allowable under the various guidelines, just so the public can understand what happens now going forward.
Thank you. Yes. So we have initiated bargaining. Our first bargaining began in February. That was from an agreement on the extension of the contract from last year. Throughout most of the state, most agencies, because of COVID, extended bargaining for a year. So we had a hard date to start bargaining. I believe it was February 1st. Thereafter, the parties met the first time and started discussing ground rules. We now have resolved those ground rules, and we will have our second bargaining session on April 19th, which is next week. The parties will begin to exchange proposals. Under those ground rules, we will have alternating sessions of open and closed meetings. And on the open meetings, there will be virtual meetings, and the city has a web link for that. In the closed meetings, pursuant to the ground rules, Commissioner Baumgartner will also be in attendance as a confidential viewer. That's part of our ground rules, and the union agreed to that to help a little bit with transparency to the city council during those closed sessions. So we will initiate bargaining next week. I believe it is a shorter day because of some scheduling conflicts. We will start trading some proposals and meanwhile schedule more bargaining dates. Bargaining dates will vary generally between 2 to 3 weeks apart, depending on schedules.
Thank you. Counselor Bielostowski, did you have any follow-up questions to that? No, okay, thank you. So the chair recognizes Counselor Jones.
Thank you, Council President Relier. I simply want to thank Chief Mahuna and Mr. Gabrielatos and the members of Westland Community for Police Reform and the members of the task force for their commitment to this work. The timing obviously was critical for them to have their recommendations set by now, and they did, and it's going to be immensely helpful to us in our collective bargaining. We thank them for their good work and their comprehensive recommendations.
Thank you, Counselor Jones. There was a question raised this evening. It was about the who was representing the Westland Police Department in the negotiations on behalf of the police department. And perhaps I should ask Councilor Schuback first if he would like to address that, or perhaps push that question over to either Mr. Gabrielatos or Ms. Preston, or perhaps Chief Mahuna.
I will handle that. And just for clarity, I'm not a council member. If you refer to me as counsel, it would be more because of the legal representation. Oftentimes those words get interchanged. Or you can call me a lawyer or a shark or whatever else you want to call me that the legal profession is used to. All levity aside, I am the chief representative or spokesperson for the bargaining unit as hired by City Council. So I am your point representative for the city of West Linn for all negotiations related to police bargaining, and inherent in that, at the direction of council, I present the proposals on behalf of the city as well as the department. So that is the easiest answer. Thereafter, I have assistance from various bargaining team members that are present at the table. Those members have been listed on the web link. Those members help me while we're at bargaining to provide input on proposals as well as day-to-day operations or answer questions. But that is not the whole of our team. There are other people behind the scenes at the management level, for example, payroll, other members of HR, or whatever experts we need on our city side to give us input about operations, past practices, policy, and so forth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schuback. I think that the question I was specifically addressing was one of the public comments this evening was about Captain Rollins's role versus Chief Mahuna's role. Is there anything that you can share with us about the selection of those parties as participants?
Just a second here. The decision of who's on the bargaining team is one that we make as a unit at the direction of City Council. Those decisions are based on either various ranks or command structure, or in providing information and assistance we might need to help address proposals. It is not uncommon for a police chief to not be at the bargaining table because I'm there as the chief spokesperson. There are many, many different variations of bargaining. For example, Portland Police, the police chief is not present at the bargaining table. It's a team that's decided upon.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Would any members of staff like to raise any questions or discuss any procedural questions or issues that they may have at this juncture? Yes, the chair recognizes Ms. Preston.
Thank you. I would just add to what Stephen was mentioning that it is Westland's past practice to have a captain and a sergeant at the bargaining table as part of the bargaining team. And that is why we have the makeup that we have, including myself.
Yes, thank you. And so Mr. Schuback mentioned that he's the primary spokesperson and that other parties are there and that he shares issues and concerns with them. And that's usually done during a breakout or a recess session, I'm assuming. but actually during the negotiations, Mr. Schobeck is the one that is communicating with the police union's representative. Is that correct?
That would be correct. It's not a closed conversation. Everyone's invited to participate or provide input. But generally speaking, when it comes to authority to sign a tentative agreement, that lies upon me.
I see. And then that process is after each negotiation session, then your team comes back to the city council through an executive session, has a discussion, and that information is kept confidential until an agreement is reached. Is that correct?
For the most part, there are times where I will meet with city council in executive session as allowed by law to discuss negotiation tactics or matters of negotiation in terms of our next steps or what we're willing to agree to or not agree to. So I'm receiving consistent and constant input from city council as well as other team members in supporting data or information or records or costing or comps or whatnot.
Thank you, Mr. Schubeck. The chair recognizes Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Council President Relier. Mr. Schubeck, again, being new to this process, please excuse this question, but when we reach a point in the collective bargaining process where we have, for lack of a better word, a draft, if you will, of an agreement, is there an opportunity for the public to see it and respond to it before either parties acts to adopt? Thank you.
So let me go to the ground rules real quick. I believe we agreed that tentative agreements can be posted, but I don't want to misspeak. We will be providing joint press releases after bargaining. And those press releases generally will identify very generically the topics that we covered, and they'll likely cover tentative agreements. In saying that as well, through various public records laws, there are documents that would be available to the public. And so that might be an avenue to provide that. When we do reach full agreement on a contract outside of binding arbitration, I generally create what is called a legislative document. The legislative document is the whole contract showing all the changes through strikeout and underlines so that council can read the whole contract and see all the changes. Sometimes people use track changes. We use legislative format. That being said, if we were to go to final offer and to interest arb, the final offer becomes a public document under the Employment Relations Board. And so that would be a public document as well. Then if the matter were going to vote on ratification, ratification is an open session. We can have an executive session to discuss matters of concerns regarding the collective bargaining agreement, tentative agreements, or the legislative draft. But the final vote is through public session. And my understanding would be is that that document would be presented in board minutes and through normal public records meetings laws. Yes.
Thank you, Council President Relier. May I do a quick follow-up?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Schubeck. Going back to your point you just made about track changes in the legislative format, for my clarification, are you suggesting changes to a first draft in our collective bargaining once we've started the process for this year? Or are you saying changes to a prior contract that we're now adapting and adopting for the new?
So the current collective bargaining agreement was last written in 2016-ish, and it was set to expire in 18. There have been 2 extension agreements or memorandum of understanding. So the contract has not been revised in a long time. There are many legal updates that need to occur in the contract just because of changes in case law or recent developments in the law. That being said, when we present proposals to the bargaining unit or to the union, we take the old contract and then we do either track changes or legislative changes, and we go back and forth. There is a lot of paperwork that's generated. Eventually, we reach a tentative agreement. The tentative agreement is generally article by article, and that is demonstrated in legislative format.
So thank you. That was very helpful. What I heard you say was in collective bargaining, we don't literally start from scratch in building a contract. We start with the prior one as a base and work from there. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, and we're required to by law because of existing conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Schubeck. Counselor Jones, any follow-up to that? All right, thank you. Counselor, the chair recognizes Counselor Baumgartner.
Thank you, Council President Relier. I have a question for the group assembled. Would it be appropriate to read a comment that we received via email? Individuals were offered the opportunity to contribute to this by sending an email, but of course they're not here necessarily to read what they wrote. Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
Council President, if I might.
Yes, please go ahead, Counselor Jones.
Thank you. And I appreciate Councilor Baumgartner that question. I'm always welcome to having public comment be shared. My only hesitancy is if we do this for this one, what other emails have come in, whether today or other days related to this, are not being read, and would we be showing deference to one email over all the others?
Good point. I just had a little bit of a concern that, I mean, I know this is somewhat of a new format for certainly with respect to this topic. And so it's possible that not everyone realized how to participate. But I do respect your point completely.
Thank you, Counselor Baumgartner. Did you have any follow-up questions?
No, I'm good for now.
Great, thank you. Mr. Schubeck, please proceed.
2 points. One, in fairness to everyone that's participated, we have received emails, and at the beginning of the meeting, we said that we would take time in executive session to go through those. So emails that are received will be heard, as well as I mentioned at the very beginning that the emails I receive, I am reading those and reviewing those. Many of them are repetitive, which is okay and fine, but they're being received. The other point that I wanted to clarify, I did look at the ground rules again. I wanted to make sure that I was correct in this, but one of the ground rules for bargaining is that the parties will coordinate the public posting of tentative agreements reached. So as we reach tentative agreements, those will roll out. We will post those on the website. The union will post those as well for their own purposes. So people will start seeing the building blocks of the collective bargaining agreement.
Great, thank you for that response, Mr. Schubeck. I do have a question regarding the Police Oversight and Accountability Task Force recommendations. That group has recently submitted, and the city has published their recommendations on our website. And there are approximately 17 proposals from that group that they would like to have incorporated into the collective bargaining agreement process. Can you let me know how that list of recommendations will be reviewed, and if it's likely that all those recommendations will make their way to the bargaining table?
Is that to me directly, or is that to everybody?
Yeah, that was specifically to you, Mr. Schubeck.
So without going into substantive matters, which is beyond the scope of this, we will need to evaluate as a council, or you as a council will need to evaluate these various proposals. And there are some things that don't necessarily need bargaining, merely by example of mandatory subjects or not. Training is generally not a mandatory subject of bargaining, it is permissive. So we can engage in training at any time or for whatever purpose we need for the law enforcement agency or other. On the other side, matters of discipline generally are a mandatory subject of bargaining. So if we were to change disciplinary sanctions or particular levels of disciplinary process, which has argument on both sides of being mandatory or permissive, depending on the impact of those changes, and there is debate. So I don't want to be definitive on that. But that being said, there are matters in the task force that likely have impact bargaining or mandatory bargaining obligations, and therefore we'll have to follow that general process. There are also some issues that relate towards risk management, and you have your own risk management carrier, so there'll have to be review on that as well.
Great, thank you. Because these recommendations are so new, I don't know that everyone's had an opportunity to review them all, but I believe there will be an opportunity for council to review these and then for us to have a discussion in an executive session regarding them in the near future. So I just want to thank the task force and the members of the public who have for very long been engaged in creating community-based organizations to address concerns that we have regarding inequities and unjust treatment by people of the BIPOC community. And, you know, I think it's important for us to recognize that how that harm has shaped our opinion and created this unrest within the community. And I think we as a council and everybody involved in the negotiation process is aware of all of the strife that exists and that we see every day throughout our state and throughout our country. So I just ask for everybody to continue to contribute and continue to be patient and to understand that there are many barriers legally as well as culturally that we are working through. And I believe that together we're stronger and that we will stay focused on what we need to do to create upstream solutions and restorative practices that allow our community to work more closely with the police department. So I'd just like to thank everybody for their contributions this evening. Does any other council member wish to make a comment? Councilor Baumgartner.
Thank you. I appreciate the statement that you just made, Council President Relier, and agree with it wholeheartedly. And like I referred to earlier, I'm very much more hopeful than I am discouraged because of the engagement at every level. There are members of the public safety, the police department who are hoping for change and are looking for support, and I will be there to give whatever I can and contribute in a positive way to whatever safe change needs to happen for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councilor Baumgartner. Mr. Schubeck, would you care to make a closing statement, or should we leave that to Mr. Gabrielatos?
Oh, well, passing the buck would be kind of fun. I might pay for it later. I can say briefly, first off, thank you for all the effort that the community has put forward. We wanted to receive that in a way in which executive members or council members could hear that information, as well as myself and Alyssa, who is on the bargaining team. I can tell you we are working on proposals and we are considering all these factors. These factors are developing every day. There is legislation pending at the same time, and so we're trying to be careful that we are attentive to legislative changes so that we are in step with our bargaining process. And I appreciate everyone's patience and input on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Schubeck. Would anybody else like to make any comments before we close this evening's meeting? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good evening.
Good night.